Yularatzon nimrefe begioni bilafanecha Adonai tsuri v'gawali. May the words of my mouth and thoughts of my heart be acceptable before you, O God, my rock and my redeemer. Shalom all and welcome to our Kosher Torah school. I am, of course, your host, Ariel Tzadok. You find me in our school online at www.KosherTorah.com. The following audio lesson is the copyrighted intellectual property of yours truly, me, Ariel Tzadok. Copyright 2017, all rights reserved. No part of this lesson may be recorded by you or anyone else, now or at any other time. It may not be recorded, forwarded to any other party, shared, reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or any means, including email, copying, recording, or any electronic or mechanical methods. Violators of this copyright will be barred from all further studies in our Kosher Torah school and possibly prosecuted under any applicable laws. So please respect this copyright, and please, this is a lesson about religion, so act properly religious. Thank you. We are presently in our course of the classical Kabbalah. The text is Masekhet Atzilut, our 8th lesson in the class. We are in the middle of a very, very interesting discussion of a relationship between the invisible and visible worlds, the physical world and the psychic world. I went into a discussion in our previous class in which I discussed my opinions on the word spiritual and how I discount it because it really just doesn't have enough meaning to it. And at the same time, to the opposite extreme, we have the symbolic, metaphorical language of the Kabbalah, be it Zoharic and most certainly Lurianic. The structure of reality that these systems bring to us is rather complete, rather detailed, and therefore serves us as an excellent vocabulary to describe and to define those things which we need to discuss. The problem, of course, exists is that all too many people do not understand the symbolic nature of these terms. So when we speak of worlds like Asiya or Yetzirah, people interpret these things as like literal, as opposed to how they are meant to be understood. They don't necessarily, as we say, connect the dots to understand things. Well, here at our Kosher Torah school, as you know, my job is to connect those dots and to give meaning and relevance to all of our symbolic, poetic metaphors, so as to make them realistic in our understanding of what it is we're dealing with. So when we want to talk about things like the divine presence, the Shekhinah, we want to talk about worlds, we want to talk about angels, we have to recognize that these things are not, in quote, spiritual or religious topics. Rather, they are, for lack of a better word, parapsychological and scientific topics. And I emphasize that word scientific, even though I am stretching the definition thereof. Science, of course, means that which we can know, experience, and test and reproduce. Well, when those people who are truly aware of the reality of that which we call the spiritual domain, then by all means there are what's called baduk uminose, tried and true methods of, if you will, making contact, maintaining contact, and using the contact for all kinds of things. Now, this is what we must understand. As we know, we live in a very busy physical world. All right? And we know that travel in our physical world is not necessarily always a safe thing to do unless one is savvy, smart, or if you will, well prepared. Actually, I was just speaking to a student earlier today, and I was asking about traveling to a foreign country. And it says you have to be very careful when you get off at the airport not to take a cab. It says the cabs sometimes are not trusted, all kinds of stories. And that very well might be true. But needless to say, some of those cab rides might be as problematic here in the United States as they might be elsewhere. Well, apply this same circumstance when you make contact to these other dimensional planes and realities, which have their own population, their own citizens, their own entities. When you enter in to another parallel dimension, you are obviously not just walking in anywhere. There are vortexes, ways of entries. Some of these are natural in nature, which you can literally fumble through. Others are opened by the power of mind, consciousness, chant, and traversed through psychology. But one way or another, whatever type of gateway, stargate, wormhole, vortex, it is still, if you will, following higher laws or rules of natural law of how these dimensions are accessed. And therefore, at these access junctions, you will find those who, like on our side, those who are willing and able to take advantage of the inexperienced making the crossover. In ancient Merkava literature, we speak of those who would ascend to the palaces. And the metaphors given there is that there were gatekeepers, angelic entities who would guard the gates. And you would have to know certain codes, or holy names, if you will, in order to get them to grant you access to further along the path. If not, that said they would cast you out. Well, all of these metaphors and symbols have a lot more validity to them than not. You see, it is understood. It is the intent and purpose of all souls to evolve, to grow, and to mature. And therefore, the entire structure of the universe in the multiverse, is founded, established to accomplish just this. In our previous class, we made a reference to the words to found something and then to establish. Two different grades. Consider it the difference between, if you will, the potential and the actual. Or, if you will, the first step and the last step. Call it, if you will, the body and the soul. All right? All things have these dual realities to them. The entire fabric of our universe, science looks out and says, it seems to be, our planet at least, seems to be teeming with life. Everything seems to be designed here for the manifestation of life. As we expand into the universe, we will see that the conditions here on our Earth obviously will be repeated many times elsewhere, and that there are other realms and domains, planets, which are equally inhabited with their own civilizations, and we will find other planets which might not be, by our definition, inhabitable of life and have their own indigenous life forms, some of which might be life not as we understand the meaning of the term. So be it. God works in many ways. And yet, through the power of mind, which is kind of like the secret of quantum entanglement, we can traverse from one realm to the other. If you're familiar with the concept of quantum entanglement, science has shown that you can have what they call sister particles. And they speed these things up in the big colliders and the like. And being that these, in quote, sister particles are opposite polarities, positive and negative, they can flip a switch, turning one particle from positive to negative. And they can therefore measure, if you will, that at a speed greater than the speed of light, its sister particle will flip its polarity in immediate succession or immediate time with its opposite. They call that a quantum entanglement, in which these particles seem to be connected in some way by some kind of contact which transcends space and time. We say that that is the power of mind. Well, just as you have individual particles that are like that, so you have everything that are made up of particles. So you have consciousness itself. We have a quantum entanglement with all other levels and elements of our own consciousness, which exists in all of these parallel domains. And if we learn how to shift from A to B to C to D, that is how we go through the worlds. But just learning how to shift includes balancing all those forces that we've been discussing in our previous lessons. Now, this relationship is continued now in our discussion here. And we're going to read a little section here which opens up quoting from a curious section in the book of Job, chapter 41. It states, Ketiv, it is written, Be'achad be'achad yigashu, v'ruach lo yavo benehem. In Job 41, verse 8, it states like this, they are so close to each other that no air comes between them. And our text says, Melamed, we learn, Shekol makom sheshechina toholechet, HaMelech HaKadosh Baruch Hu ima. That every place that the divine presence goes, the King, the Holy One, blessed be He, goes with her. Kadesh lo yavo ruach ha'umot chas v'chalila v'kalu et Knesset Yisrael. So that the spirit of the nations do not, God forbid, come and seek to destroy the Knesset, or the gathering of Israel. Now, this is very curious terminology, and it might not be saying what it seems to be on the surface. But let's continue. Mashal, let's give an example. L'melech sheshilach matrunita shelo lelech baderech. A king who sends his queen, if you will, on a journey. Rachoka, a distant journey, liftot beneha meshviah, to redeem her children who have been captured. But the king is concerned not to send her alone, fearing that something could happen to her along the way. And therefore he goes with her. And that is the meaning of this verse from Job 41:8. They are so close to each other that no air comes between them. And then it states here, quoting Isaiah, V'kol tzaratam lo tsar, right? V'kol tzaratam lo tsar. That all of their troubles is his trouble. Now, let's explain what we're talking about. The queen of whom we speak in this example, of course, is what we call the Asiatic world, the Malchut, the Shekhinah, the place of the indwelling of divine intelligence, which tells everything in the natural world to be what it is. And yet, the natural world is ruled, it is dictated by natural law. Natural law is rigid. You cannot break natural law. Now, we can learn its parameters, we can learn how to circumvent and go around, but we're never actually going to break it. So, we will never break, for example, the law of gravity. But we might learn ways and means of anti-gravity. Look, for example, to the Bible at the miracles, the very famous miracles of Yetziat Mitzrayim, Exodus. Of course, the most famous is the parting of the Red Sea. Now, unlike in the Cecil B. DeMille version of the story, in which Moses stands at the water and says, "Behold his mighty hand," and then the water just sucks out of the way. I mean, it is, even for the 50s, really cool special effects. But that's not what happened. The Bible makes it very clear that no supernatural force occurred, but rather it was a strong wind, gale force winds. And at this time, we've just experienced the Class 4, Class 5 hurricanes going through the Caribbean and South Florida with winds up to 150, 180 miles an hour. Well, can you imagine winds almost twice that fast? All right, blowing against water? Absolutely, would push the water out, and you would have dry land. Well, that's what happened. Now, what then was the miracle of the parting of the sea? It wasn't so much that the water parted, it was the coincidence of the moment and the time. That is the presence of the king with his queen. And that is the meaning of this text here. Natural law exists. Very cruel, very rigid, is what it is. And yet, it's not going to be violated. It's not going to be broken. But it can be manipulated. There are numerous ways to manipulate the laws of nature. Science and scientific discovery is only one of these methods. Think about it. We can sit in the middle of a blistering hot summer's day and magically, abracadabra, alakazam, shish boom bam, and here I am, I can make it cool. How? I wave my magic hands over my magic little box called the thermostat, and I make some hocus pocus sounds and noises, and I turn on the air conditioning. Wow, how cool that is. Air conditioning doesn't violate natural law, but it's a use of the law. That God gave man intelligence. Remember we talked about that irrational intellectual mind? That enabled us to develop the technology of air conditioning. Apply that, of course, to every other technology in the world. We fly. We've been flying for a century. Today we take it for granted. If we went back to the year 1817, and I said to people, in 200 years, we're going to have flying ships that are going to be able to fly over the Atlantic Ocean from New York to London in 6 hours. People would look at you and say, nonsense, crazy, you're dreaming. And yet here we have it. Now, jet engines are not a violation of the law. They work with the law. Apparently, if and when we violate natural law, that's what can cause crashes. But anyway, I think you're understanding the point. When it says that the king goes with his queen so as to defend her from dangers on the way. If nature could never be, if you will, learned, then we would be subject to the forces of nature and never be able to dominate them. But God gives us intelligence, wisdom, the power of the mind to understand nature, and that is the, in quote, secret of the presence of the Holy One, blessed be He, that goes along with nature. And what does it do? Well, as it says, it protects her along the way. Symbolically saying, it protects the human intellect, enables us to develop technology. And remember, we're far, far, far away from what we will eventually discover. And therefore, we can resolve and overcome those forces in nature to which in the past we have had absolutely no defense. Science is now understanding the concept of aging with cellular reproduction. It very well might be possible that they can develop some kind of cellular therapy to reverse cellular deconstruction, and possibly with some type of cellular therapy introduce into the DNA perfectly reproducing cellular reproduction that would not degrade over time and therefore cancel out aging. I have heard from scientists say it's going to happen. If it hasn't happened in some black secret laboratory already, it can happen. All these things that we see about in science fiction and the like, somehow, somewhere in some black project, somebody's working on it. It's amazing what we can discover. This is the secret. And yet at the same time, we say that the Spirit, the God, goes with so that the Knesset Yisrael would not be destroyed by the Ruach of the Umot, of the nations. That sounds rather nationalistic and ethnic. In other words, God comes down to protect the Jews from the nations, right? It's a dramatic pause, and the answer is no, it's not right. That's not what it says at all. There's actually no mention of Judaism here, or Jews at all. It doesn't say Am Yisrael, it doesn't say Am Yehudim. It says Knesset. Knesset Yisrael is a specific term, and it indicates, if you will, the enlightened souls. Unenlightened souls is called the Ruach of, not the people of the nations of the world, but rather the spirit of them. You see, the Ruach Umot and Knesset Yisrael are not speaking of Jews and Gentiles. They're speaking of different types of souls. Call them, if you will, enlightened souls versus unenlightened souls. This has always been the point that the Jewish sages, Talmudic sages, even Kabbalistic sages, when they want to speak about the difference between Jews and the nations, they wanted to make a distinction between, if you will, education and lack of education. And the sages were the absolute first ones to come and say, Eka Chochma Bagoyim, there's wisdom amongst the nations. And were the first to respect and honor their peers in every nation, whether we're dealing with the likes of Maimonides, or even in Zoharic Kabbalah. For those who've ever studied any types of metaphysics or mysticism, you cannot go into Hindu or Vedic writings, Buddhist writings, and not respect the value of the profundity of some of their teachings. Now, some of my more ethnic brethren might say, oh, you're respecting outside of our culture. And the answer, of course, is, but of course I am. Absolutely. Just like our sages before me have done throughout all the centuries. There's no question about that. And anybody who's ethnocentric, you're a racist. And that contradicts all of what Judaism and Torah is all about. And I condemn such mentalities. The major difference, and this is a point made very clear by Rambam, is between the enlightened and the unenlightened. So even when the Kabbalistic writings, Lurianic writings, they speak about the level of the inanimate, the vegetative, animal, and human, and then a fifth element which he calls Israel. Israel's not Jews. Don't ever think that. Why? You think every Jew is an enlightened, higher spiritual person? Oh, really? They're the master race? See, Kyle? Right? Are we going to have a little guy with a little fuzzy mustache with a kippah on his head? Really? That is not what the meaning is here. And this is why I'm so emphatic of opening the doors of our KosherTorah school to absolutely everyone. I make no criteria for entry other than you want to learn. Because all human souls, I don't care what your sexual persuasion, your religious persuasion, your color, anything. If you want to learn and you're able to learn, you're willing to learn, then you grow and you evolve, because that is what human souls do. The term Knesset Yisrael, or what the Kabbalah refers to as that fifth level of, we call it Yisrael. Every religion has the same concept, but it's called by different names. The fact that in the Jewish tradition it would be called Yisrael, well, gee whiz, what else would we call it? Right? It's the highest, the evolved level, where Jacob transcends to become something higher. The enlightened human being, male and female. So therefore, if you have an enlightened Buddhist master, an enlightened Hindu master, an enlightened Sufi, even an enlightened Catholic Christian sitting somewhere in a monastery, all of these, in quote, enlightened souls would technically be called Yisrael, or Knesset Yisrael. All of them transcend the limitations of their ethnic, cultural parameters, and they live righteous lives. And our sages are very emphatic. They clearly show us what these laws, if you will, of righteousness, we call it the Sheva Mitzvot, right? Decency, morality, righteousness, and good, acknowledging the truth of the existence of the singularity. And this is what it's all about. This is Knesset Yisrael. Everyone else, including unenlightened Jews, and that can include religious ones as well, spiritually speaking, are Umot Ha'olam. They are not in the spiritual domain of this context called Israel. So, I know many of my peers are going to get very upset at me revealing this truth, but too bad. You have all too many, in quote, Jews who are ethnic and cultural or religious, but they are unenlightened souls. Therefore, they haven't achieved that higher level, which we call by that symbolic name. But those who can accomplish that level, they become the movers and the shakers, and the ones who contribute to the collective consciousness and provide for us all the advancements that we have in science, technology, art, literature, music. These are what we call the Eluim, the gifted ones. And I don't care how great and profound a photographic memory you may have, that you might memorize the entire Talmud, right? So you're good at knowing Talmud. Let me ask you a question. Do you know how to fix the air conditioner? Do you know how to invent the next great invention? No? But the guy who does, you gotta give credit to him, because somehow, somewhere, that spirit from above is speaking in his mind and not yours, revealing to him the mathematics, the technology, the science, or the art, the music. Think about it. How many Da Vinci's and Michelangelo's and Mozart's and Beethoven's and Bach's are Jewish? Not many. Not many at all. You might want to argue and say, well, maybe in their ancestry, well, whatever. But look at the level of the Enlightenment. I could point to you and say a Jewish person like Albert Einstein. But what about the non-Jewish person, Nikola Tesla? Think about it. These are the definitions here. This is that relationship between these two worlds that we've been discussing previously. Yetzirah, Asiya. The physical, the spiritual. We spoke about the rational intellect and the imaginative. And all of this is the practical application thereof. I made this point even in our television program, Ancient Aliens, where I was asked about the likes of Nikola Tesla. And I said, if you ever studied Tesla's biographies, the nature of his scientific insights came about in the same form of spiritual revelations. So therefore, were his revelations any less spiritual than that of a Kabbalist? Where did this information, or let me rephrase, how did it get into his head? Somehow, somewhere, remember we spoke about that quantum entanglement of levels of consciousness through the dimensional planes? Somehow, somewhere, that part of the brain or thoughts of his present physical body, this world, were in connections with other dimensional planes of his own self, which were able to somehow go through these doorways and passages, vortex, stargates, whatever. Bingo, make contact. And this is what we call revelation. Yes, in religion we even call it Ruah HaKodesh. So, think about that the next time you're in a museum and you see breathtaking art. When you go to a concert, for example, and I'll give my personal opinion. In our day and age, now late 20th, early 21st century, as we know, the greatest art form that we have today is movies. Well, aside from the movie element, the one thing that we have, of course, are the soundtracks. And one of the greatest composers of soundtrack music is John Williams. Now, I don't know Mr. Williams. I don't know anything about his personal life. But if you listen to the tunes that he has created, these tunes, in my opinion, have become part of the collective consciousness of where we're at today in our society, and I predict will last for hundreds of years to come. The tunes of things like Indiana Jones, Star Wars, and the like, such haunting music that seems to have such a life of its own. How does this come into his mind? Well, if you would ever sit down and ask him, I predict he would just say what just comes to him. I don't know how spiritually developed he is to recognize these things about parallel dimensions and, quantum entanglements of levels of consciousness and the like. He might not think like that. But that doesn't mean that the doorway is not open for the contact to be made. I give this example as opposed to about some great righteous holy rabbi or spiritual leader who actually goes to pursue it, to emphasize, just like with the parting of the Red Sea with the winds, everything goes by a natural path. Everybody has access to this. Everybody has the potential. No, not everybody is going to be the next John Williams or Beethoven. Not everybody is going to be the next Da Vinci or Michelangelo. Not everybody is going to be the next Einstein or Tesla or the next Ariel or Yosef Karo or Moshe Rabbeinu or Isaiah. No. What you will be is what you are. You will connect to and therefore channel who and what you are. The more you come back to yourself, the more you will be. I'll give an example. This is an example of one of our own very students in the school. He's going to hopefully recognize I'm talking about him. I teach this one student, and he's a decent, good, righteous, God-fearing man, and he's on the path of discovery and on the path of what we call self-fulfillment. But he hasn't gotten, if you will, to the top of the mountain yet. And I can tell him, as I say to him, you don't have to say, God be willing, you'll get there. I guarantee you that which you seek, you will accomplish. And how can I say that? What arrogance do I have? What spiritual knowledge do I have? And I said, no. It's because this is who you are. And being that you seek God, spirituality, Kabbalah, you will find what you are. And it will unfold within you because there is nothing else other than what's in you to come out of you. And this is what's in you, and that's what's going to come out of you, and that is guaranteed. And that lesson about him applies to every one of us. Each one of us has that which is unique. When I was a boy, right, my entire desire, I put everything aside because I wanted to study this. Well, Here I am 50 years later, and I've accomplished. And I'm still going to climb the mountain because the mountain never ends. This other gentleman, he's going to pursue, and it's natural that he's going to accomplish in his path, just like each and every one of us. You guys are going to accomplish each in your own path. It doesn't matter if you're 15 or 50, 6 or 60, male, female, Jew, Gentile, none of that matters. Because you have a quantum entanglement with those other higher elements of yourself, and they will naturally flow through you as long as you're open to receive it. That's the secret of this verse. They are so close to each other that no air comes between them. Now, with that being said, let's continue with our next section of this and discuss elements of this which again continue to expand this teaching. Our text continues, Ketiva Vatre. It's written, continuing after this verse here, again quoting the same verse. All right, they're so close to each other that no air comes between them. All right, and then it says Melamed. This is to teach us Shasarim Metatron ve Sandalphon, that the two princes, Metatron and Sandalphon, Hema ish be'ahab yidebeku. All right, they applied to them. They're so close to each other that, like we said, no air comes between them. All right, Afilu sheyitlakdu be'avanot Yisrael lo yitparaku velo yitparadu. Even if the sins of Israel rise up or are hindered, etc., and so on, they will not be separated and they will not be divided. Now, if you remember, we discussed Metatron and Sandalphon. They are symbolic of the two cherubim on top of the ark. But they are not just individuals. They are, if you remember, according to the book called the Emek HaMelech by Rabbi Bakrak, he states that Metatron is a collective of all the souls of humanity that did not come to earth in what we call the fall of Adam. So that's us. Sandalphon is also the lower rung, a lower part of Metatron. That's why they don't get separated. They're called like male and female. It's kind of like one and the same. In the Yitziratic realm, it's called Metatron. As it descends into this dimensional plane called the Asiatic, it's called Sandalphon. And it's one and the same. Front and back, top to bottom, head to feet, whatever symbolic metaphor. And all this is inside of us. Each and every one of us is, if you will, a spark of this Sandalphon, which therefore becomes part of a spark of the Metatron. That's why it said that there's no separation between the two. They're all part. And even when there's, in quote, sins can cause disconnection. Well, this connection between our higher and lower selves is never disconnected. So, in magical properties and principles, when we call upon the angels Sandalphon or Metatron, number one, these names are not holy. They're symbolic. They're actually Greek in origin, but that's besides the point. They are representative of something. And when you call upon Sandalphon or you call upon Metatron, they will be experienced in the mind of the beholder within the context of the individual, him or herself. Sandalphon is, believe it or not, always often experienced in some way as feminine. And that's why it is often referred to as the Shekhinah, Malchut, the divine presence. In some ways, some cultures have the concept of the divine female. And it takes on very curious cultural expressions, which on the surface might seem bizarre, and theologically on the surface might actually seem idolatrous. Catholics, as we know, pray to the Virgin Mary. In the Hispanic traditions, they have Santa Muerta, right? Who is like the mother of death. But if you actually go into the theologies beneath these symbols, you recognize that they're talking about an archetype, a symbolic representation, which therefore transcends the superficial expression of the individual icon. Now, most people do not think that deeply. And therefore, when they offer their prayers to Santa Muerta, the Virgin Mary, or any of the others, they are indeed not thinking about the singularity, wherein which, as we've learned in our previous lesson, all thoughts, all focus, all mind must go into that singularity, symbolized by the midrashic statement that Sandalphon gathers all the prayers together and knits them as a crown. Well, again, when individuals mistakenly do not see the unity, this is when the energy can get siphoned off to the sides, if you will, kind of like stolen. And that's what we call idolatry. Bad, bad, bad. And yet the verse in the book of Malachi, in the Bible, where in which it states, from the rising of the sun to the going down thereof, great is my name among the nations. And even the famous Rashi commentary states, quoting earlier sources, that as long as the context, the concept of the singularity is in the mind of the worshiper, or in his language he says that they are praying to the God of gods, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, which is a concept held in all religions, that God accepts that from them as if it was a pure sacrifice. And that is why we look at the peoples of all different religions, and we don't judge them by superficialities, but we transcend to look at essence, and teach people to transcend superficiality to get to essence. Because Sandalphon and Metatron, not even a hair's breadth between them. And now, our text is going to get a little strange on us. So let's continue it. It continues by quoting the verses in this chapter of Job 41 and applies them to, of all things, Metatron. So, let me read to you this entire section. I'm going to read to you from chapter Job, the book of the Bible, chapter 41, verses 8 through 20. And it states like this. I'll just read the English for convenience. They are so close to each other that no air comes between them. One adheres to the other. They stick together and cannot be separated. He sneezes, flash forth fire, and his eyes are like the rays of dawn. From his mouth goes firebrands. Sparks of fire go forth like foam. From his nostrils smoke go forth like a bubbling pot and an earthenware vessel. His breath kindles coals. Flames come forth from his mouth. Strength lodges in his neck. Sadness rejoices before him. The flakes of his flesh are joined together, poured out upon it not to move. His heart is as strong as stone, and as strong as the lower millstone. From his fear the mighty are frightened, the breakers fail. He who overtakes him with a sword, it will not remain, neither will a spear or slingshot nor a coat of mail. He regards iron as straw, and copper as rotten wood. No arrow can put him to flight. slingshots turn into stubble before him. Okay. Alright. This is Metatron. Well, again, remember we're talking symbolically. But what exactly is the book of Job, chapter 41, talking about? The question is not what. The question is who. And unfortunately, when we read the Bible in English, we find that the chapter divisions are not always following the original Hebrew structure of the text. As such, what begins chapter 41 is actually a continuation of what is written in chapter 40. And that which is spoken about here in this book of Job is a reference to a creature, a large reptilian creature, a real-life Godzilla called Leviathan, the Leviathan. What exactly this Leviathan is a good question. Some interpret it to be an actual, physical, enormous reptilian creature. Like I said, like a real, actual Godzilla. There's a reference in the Gemara in which Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua were on a boat, and one looks over and sees these two large glowing eyes staring up at him from the water. Freaks out, goes to the other and says, I saw these big eyes. Says, you saw Leviathan. Are there real Godzillas? Very possible. If we want to interpret this literally. Some do, others don't. And it's, again, a matter of interpretation. But our text is taking license, if you will, and applying this to our understanding of Metatron. Now again, who and what is Metatron? Metatron is this higher Leviathan. Now, some interpret the Leviathan to be a reference to some ancient, actual reptilian form which may have actually physically existed and now has ascended. Some associate the Leviathan with the Teli. Others don't. The problem with discussing Leviathan is that you're going to find all different kinds of interpretations and ideas and beliefs, which many are mutually exclusive of one another. And people will mix and match and merge and come to confusions because they don't know how to put all the pieces together. Well, remember, whenever we're dealing with midrash, which are moralistic stories or embellishments, etc., they're not meant to fit together like pieces of a puzzle. But rather, they're meant to fit into, if you will, the same drawer in different compartments. They're not the same. So don't try to put all the stories of Leviathan together to come up with a conclusive whole of how all the pieces fit. They don't. One is meant to be interpreted this way according to that interpretation. The other interpretation looks at it in a second way. The third interpretation looks at it a third way. Our text is taking these verses and applying them within a context to this Archangel Metatron, who, we just said, is so connected to the Sandalphon that we shouldn't make a difference. Well, if that's the case, how come we don't refer to the two of them? Why don't we just refer to the one? And the answer is because we have a long tradition in the Hechalot Merkava teachings of talking about the Archangel Metatron. So being that we talk about him all the time, our text is doing the same. 1 second, please. So, it speaks about him, that the sneeze of Metatron sneezes, again, symbolically speaking, flashes with fire. His eyes, all right, are like the darkness, the flames come forth from him. His soul is like burning coals. And it states, Melamed, to teach us. that from flesh and blood, Metatron, if you remember who was Enoch, was turned into coals of fire. All right? And therefore, all these references in Job 41, according to our interpretation and application here, is going to refer to Metatron. And it states here, no, arrow can penetrate him. What are these arrows? Our text says, Ze Samael, shmikatreg, zorek chitzim leYisrael. That Samael, if you remember, he was the head of all the fallen angels whose job it is to serve as the Av Bet Din of the heavenly Sanhedrin, to serve as guardian and the developer of earth. And he looks at all of the evolving souls. And his job is to refine them, challenge them, push them. That's why he's called the Satan, which means the accuser. So when we refine our souls and seek to ascend above, his job is ordained by God, is to stand there and say, where are you going? What gives you the right? Who told you that you are so high and sublime that you can ascend? He is opposing you. He is prosecuting you. That is what a Satan does. He is not, in the Christian tradition, the Satan, the opposite of God, the rebel of God, who's in charge of hell, who seeks your soul so you can burn there forever. No. None of that falls into our Jewish context. Samael is God's servant. Yes, he is the accuser of man. Yes, he causes us to stumble. Not good. But just because there are things that are painful does not make them necessarily, from a point of view, bad. When we exercise, especially in weightlifting, we have a statement: no pain, no gain. Well, the pain is not evil and bad. It's actually necessary and good, but you got to go through it to get beyond it. Well, you got to go through Samael and get beyond him and everything that he represents. And that is the most important understanding here. When he says that he can throw arrows, challenges, and yet you stand and rise above them. That is the great secret. And it continues to state here, Vayisachak l'ra'ash kedon ze Lillith rasha'a. And it says that his, in quote, mate is Lilith. Lilith is the she-demon. Lilith is, again, a symbolic metaphor, if you will, for all types of sexually based temptations, imbalances of libido, sexually oriented sin. And I don't mean just things like rape and abuse. Take so much a part and parcel of our human experience that it's amazing how much of all of our human troubles can come back to it. Whenever, in quote, a person might seek to aggrandize his nation, seek to conquer the world, it might be because of some kind of a psychological sexual imbalance. That if we could take this so-called leader and psychoanalyze them, we might find them much less aggressive. So Lilith is a psychological imbalance. And don't worry about the mythology of her being a real she-demon. Rather, she is, again, this imbalance within us. All right? So again, it states here, Melamed, we are here to learn that Samael, the Shiv'im Sarav, and his 70 princes, again, this heavenly Sanhedrin, Enehenim Me'or Shel Mala, they don't receive direction and light from above, Ela Me'achorav shel Metatron, other than from the backside of Metatron. Oh, that's right. The backside of Metatron is given a different name. We call it Sandalphon. And Sandalphon, again, is that element of the higher souls that exist in this domain, and they are above all Samael, the angels, Lilith, and all the rest. Let's apply this now in reality. Take it out of the realm of our superstitions and our mythologies. When you connect to your inner higher self, as it is within our grasp in this world to achieve, that higher self in this world is called the Sandalphon level of consciousness. We can call that Israel consciousness, same thing. Well, that is the highest level. And when you achieve that, you have overcome Samael, the angel guardians, the watchers, all these lower temptations. You have balanced and aligned your emotions, the likes of which we've discussed in previous classes. Your behaviors are refined. Your mind is clear and refined. You have overcome. Well, all of these other forces of chaos and imbalance, all right, they are subservient to the higher self. And that's why it says that they can only receive from the backside of Metatron. And that is the symbol of what we're meaning and saying here. ואת כל גבוה יראה שמקבל חוזק ואומץ מאקטריאל. And Metatron, he itself, us, are associated with the image of the man upon the throne at the Bariatic level, also known as Akatriel. Shehu Gavoa Memeno, which of course is above the Metatron level. So the Metatron level, that is our Yetziratic source. Sandalphon is our Asiatic source. Akatriel is the Bariatic source. And one is aligned with the other and the other. Another name for Sandalphon is Yahuel. And we discussed that the relationship of Shamuel and Akatriel is kind of like one and the same. Metatron, and then Sandalphon with Yahuel, and it forms, if you will, Shamuel, Metatron, and then Yahuel, which is the same as Akatriel, Metatron, and Sandalphon. Shin Mem Yud, Shemi, this is my name. This is the channel and the conduit of consciousness, that wormhole, that path, that stargate that I spoke to you about, through which we channel, through which we grow, through which we move. Right? So it states here, Shehu HaMelech al kol b'nei shahatz. Right? So, Katriel, Metatron, Sandalphon, this is the king of all the others like Samakel and his Sarim. Right? Shechutzim bihirim. And they are, of course, the lower domains. So what I've revealed to you and shared with you here is the secret of what we call tikkun, rectification, alignment, balance, by understanding the metaphors of all of this angelic concept. These are the secrets of what we call Ma'aseh Merkava, the path of Hechalot ascent. And understanding the nature and relationship of all things, putting them together, recognizing them within ourselves, recognizing our own shortcomings and overcoming them, finding and seeking and accomplishing the balance and alignment, physically, emotionally, mentally. Boom, boom, boom. We connect all the worlds, and that's the secret of what our text is here to teach us. Alrighty. On that note, I've concluded this section of what we needed to discuss now. God be willing, our next class we'll pick up and take it from there. I want to thank you again all for joining me tonight. Again, I'm your host, Ariel Tzadok. Thank you for your continuing support of our Kosher Torah School. God bless. Good night. Shalom. 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 Shalom.